Hello, and welcome to FNMPC's Indigenous Sustainable Investment Series, where we focus discussion around Indigenous participation and perspective in all North American projects, major projects across North America. My name is Mark Podlasley, Director of Economic Policy and Initiatives at FNMPC, and I'm a member of the Yellowknives Dene Nation, and I'm your host for today's discussion. I would like to take this time to acknowledge that today's event airs from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations here in Vancouver. I would also like to thank FNMPC sustaining partners, Collier's project leaders, Cowie, Galling WLG, and New Gold for supporting today's discussion. Our sustaining partners power FNMPC to increase strategies that promote meaningful Indigenous inclusion in major developments and articulate Indigenous perspectives concerning ESG investment standards and sustainable business practices generally. Today, we will be discussing the EV battery mineral supply chain. Our panelists will highlight how the coming $1 trillion in mineral investment must be managed to respect Indigenous rights and interests, protect our shared environment, and put us on track to meet net zero targets by 2050. On April 25th and 26th, FNMPC, in partnership with First Peoples Worldwide, will be hosting its 5th annual Industry Engagement Conference at the Bayshore Westin in Vancouver. This year's event is toward net zero by 2050. The 2-day hybrid event, held in person and online, will host Indigenous leaders, industry experts, policymakers, and investors across North America to highlight carbon-reducing examples in 4 key areas that are either Indigenous-led or have strong potential for industry, government, Indigenous partnership. These are clean energy transition, battery mineral supply chain, Indigenous sustainable finance, and innovation in policy and legislation to achieve 2050 climate change targets. For more information and to purchase early bird tickets, please visit fnmpcindustryevent.com. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our incredible panel of speakers today. We have Lena Black, CEO of the Yellowknives Dene First Nation, Paul Gruner, President and CEO of Det'on Cho Management LP, and Paramita Das, Head of Chicago Commercial Office and General Manager, Global Marketing and Development, Rio Tinto, and David Peterson, Vice President, Corporate and Environmental Affairs, GM Canada. Thank you all for joining us today. I would ask each of you to take a couple minutes to introduce yourselves to our audience today. I will start with you, Lena, and Paul, to speak on the Indigenous role in the supply chain.
Hi, everyone. I'm calling today from my homeland, Chief Jaggies Territory. Chief Jaggies Territory in Yellowknife is essential to the Northwest Territories. We have 2 communities, Deta and Delo, approximately just over 1,600 members in the 2 communities with Yellowknife. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Lena. Yellowknives Dene First Nations, to Lena's point, is the central First Nation to the capital city of Northwest Territories. Det'on Cho Management LP is the economic arm for the First Nation. We're proudly one of the largest private employers of local people here in the territory. So we've got approximately 800 employees, 600 of which being local, and a long history within the mining sector. So Northwest Territories is known for a very robust diamond mining sector. So because of the diamonds that are produced here in Northwest Territories, it makes Canada the 3rd largest producer of diamonds in the world. And the reason that's important for today's topic is it gives us sort of time in within the industry. We've been an active participant within the mining space for 20 plus years. And as a result of that, have built up significant capacity in terms of our participation within the supply chain when we're looking at different projects as they come to the forefront today. I know a few highlights of where we participate within that mining space and that supply chain is we've got a fairly significant camp catering company, which has been very meaningful as part of COVID over the last 18 months. So we've made sure that we've kept from a cleanliness, from a health perspective within the operating facility. So we're actually the second largest camp catering company, Indigenous camp catering company in the country. And also logistics is another major piece for us. So we actively conduct all of the logistics, the backbone for those diamond mines up into Nunavut, and then the supply side all the way from Alberta as it comes up the highway. Det'on Cho Logistics, we believe, as a pure 3PL or 4PL model, is the largest Indigenous logistics company in the country. So we've built, and that's just a couple of examples where we've built real capacity to participate within that mining space. We do a lot of work around the construction side. So there's a large winter road that's built on an annual basis to connect those diamond mines. We actively participate in that. Significant acquisitions of equipment on site, labor supply, et cetera. So when we look at resource projects that are coming to fruition within the territory, we now have that capacity where we can have real meaningful participation around that. And we don't just limit in terms of our engagement with community members. To Lena's point, at 1,600 members, where from a national perspective, we're relatively small First Nation. We actively employ across a number of Indigenous groups and local people here in the territory, and we're very, very proud of that. And I think to sort of finish off the introduction of sort of YKDFN Det'on Cho, we were recognized 2 years ago as the Economic Leadership of the Year Award by the Chamber of Mines for NWT Nunavut. The year prior to that, won by De Beers Canada. So, not only are we a significant Indigenous corporation here in the territory, we're certainly being recognized as well as being a key economic driver. And that's something that, we're very keen to continue to grow and develop over time. Masi Cho, thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn now to David to speak about the EV battery demand that's coming for his industry and climate targets towards 2030 and 2050.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for inviting me to be here. It's a real pleasure. This, just to sort of set the scene for us, is an incredible time for us to be working in the auto sector, because we're really going through the largest technological change since our company was making horse-drawn carriages back at the turn of the century. So this move to electric vehicles is really now accelerating, and it must do so for no more important reason than dealing with climate change. In Canada, for example, where I do most of my work, the vehicles that are on, or transportation overall, is about 35% of overall greenhouse gases. All the light duty vehicles on the road, the kind of vehicles we make, from pickup trucks down to small electric cars, are about 12% of greenhouse gases. And we have to be able to make real progress. Electric cars are not new, of course. General Motors actually was we put the electric car on the moon, the lunar rover. The technology is been around, but it's that acceleration of growth. So for us at GM, we've set a target of having all of our light duty fleet of vehicles be fully battery electric by 2035, which is not a long time in the scheme for the auto industry. And of course, this is something that we're seeing right across the industry. People have heard of a lot about electric cars from some new entrants into the business, companies like Tesla and others, which is exciting. We've been in the electric car selling business in a big way for the last 10 years with the Chevrolet Volt and then the Chevrolet Bolt. But even with all of those different manufacturers making electric cars, we're only at around 3% fully battery electric cars. So that's a huge acceleration. If you think in the United States alone, there are annually in the range of about 17 million vehicles sold every year. So let's flash forward to 2035 and that real ramp up of vehicles. If you have all those vehicles moving to electric, we're going to need a lot of batteries. And batteries are really the absolute holy grail of doing this successfully. Companies like ours are effectively owning our own battery chemistry and developing our own battery plants. And with that, we're also making a huge shift in North America to take a look at how our supply chain, a new supply chain for those batteries, which includes, of course, everything from minerals to mineral processing to the creation of battery cells, little pouches that then go into batteries and get assembled into battery assemblies. There's all kinds of software that needs to go into electric batteries, and then, of course, to assemble them into the vehicles. So it's a radical change in the way that we make cars. It's also something that involves all of us because we all are affected by driving. And this will only work, this transition, if we help consumers to make the switch to electric vehicles. So governments need to be a big part of that in providing incentives in the early years when electric vehicles are more costly. We need a charging network so that people feel confident that they can get to where they need to go with long distances. If you're living in Tuktoyaktuk, you're going to be concerned about that. And so we need to get all of those things sorted out over the next decade. And it's going to take a real team effort to be able to do that. Our intention is to be a leader. And what's really exciting, it's great to have niche companies that come in and lead in this area. But when you get big companies like General Motors and Ford and others making the shift to fully battery electric, that's where you see the big marketplace changes. And that's where you're going to see a big change in the supply chain. And I look forward to talking more about that as we go forward here.
Great. Thank you, David. And Paramita, could you please provide us opening comments?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. And thanks to the entire team for organizing this webinar. Joining you from Chicago, United States, and really excited to talk to my fellow panelists and to you all about this very critical topic. Look, there are three topics for us that are emerging: energy transition, the EV revolution, and the green future. And what does it mean for all of us? Simply put, it means that it's not going to be easy. As David said, that the path is clear, but the path is not going to be easy. We all have to work together. And it will require innovative thinking, foresight, R&D, advanced planning, but a lot of collaboration, partnership, and out-of-box thinking. Really quickly for Rio Tinto, if I have to introduce anybody in the United States, for Rio Tinto, I usually start with diamonds, Paul, as you mentioned, just to intrigue their interest. But since it's North American context, allow me to say we are the second largest global diversified mining company. We have operations in 36 countries, but in United States and in Canada. So I'll stick to North America for this topic today. When it comes to where Rio Tinto matters, our materials go into electric vehicles, into cars, cans, buildings, cell phones, and aerospace materials. So we are making all that possible through our materials. And the materials that we have include the fact that we are the largest producer of low carbon aluminium. And that's possible because of the fantastic water that we have in Canada. We probably know as much about hydro-powered electricity as we know metals and minerals. We produce high-grade iron ore at Iron Ore Company of Canada, which is critical for the green steel supply chain. We have minerals and critical minerals that are being processed, and not only processed from in general, but processed from waste stream. And we are bringing products like scandium, tellurium, rhenium to the rare earths industry, not only to secure the supply chain in North America, but also to make future things possible. In the United States, we have our more than 100-year-old Kennecott mine in Utah. Kennecott, KUC as we call it, supplies around 20% of the US copper demand. We also have new mine developments in Arizona Resolution Copper, which will, at full production, supply 25% of US copper demand. And out of California, boron, we are extracting lithium from mine waste. And lastly, I'll also say that we have an interest in Tamarack nickel project in Minnesota. So I'm naming all the different materials that we bring to the world. But the biggest thing for us to mention is we're addressing climate change. And the society wants change. The government and the businesses are now working together. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity to really respond and change this future. I call it almost the industrial revolution, the next industrial revolution. Is the work easy? Absolutely not. But has countries like US and Canada come together and brought their core competency to the best utilization to make it happen before? Absolutely. And when that combination works, it works magic. It's pioneering, it's revolutionary, it's path breaking, and that's what we hope this next journey for us will be. And Rio Tinto hopes to be a part of the solution. Looking forward to the dialogue, Mark, and back to you.
Thank you to all of you for your opening comments. It's very much appreciated. So David, I'm going to start with a question to you. You had mentioned that there are 17 million vehicles sold annually in North America. Almost half of those are provided by GM. To reach the goals that your company has set out by 2035, all of them will have to be electric or at least zero emission by that point. How realistic is it, given the short time frame, that all those vehicles can be electric powered?
I think it is realistic that, that's our goal, is to have our entire fleet of vehicles be fully battery electric. We're not talking hybrids and plug-in partially electric vehicles. We're talking fully battery electric vehicles with significant batteries, and the battery is really the technological center of that challenge. And so I mentioned earlier a couple of the key hurdles that we have to get over. Some of those are for government now. This is the auto industry is one that's been regulated to do better for a long time. But really, that's less of the issue right now. Companies like mine are declaring, look, we're all in. We're going fully battery electric. But now what we need to be successful in this is a partnership to make it work. The battery is a lot more expensive to put into a vehicle than an internal combustion engine and transmission now. And so our biggest technological challenge is really centered around the battery. And for us to be successful, what we need to do is cut the cost of the batteries that we have today by about 50% and to make them go about twice as far. And that's an engineering challenge that these are sort of counterpoints that we have to get over. And so battery chemistry is going to change over the next 10 years. We're continuing to innovate. We need to use a lot of software and capability. Oddly enough, we tend to think of batteries as something that we put into a flashlight. But in an automobile, and we do a lot of this in Canada, by the way, batteries like to be they're like people, they like to be around 20 degrees Celsius. And so we need to manage those batteries carefully. So all that technology needs to work its way through. And, but if we can get the cost of the batteries down, get the range of the fuels to be a lot more consistent to what we expect from our vehicles today, and we're close to getting there. And at the same time, build out a charging network. That's a very big investment. The United States just passed a bill that will add about $7.5 billion of charging station capability across the United States. That sounds pretty big, but we think it might need to be 10 times the size of that. And so we're going to have to keep up with that in Canada, which is about a tenth of the market. We're also going to need to help consumers to buy those more expensive vehicles until we can get the battery costs down. And in the United States, there's a bill before Congress that would offer over $12,000 per electric vehicle purchase to help people get into those vehicles. We have about a third of that in Canada today, so we're going to have to keep up. So there's a lot of challenges for our governments. There's a lot of cost. And in the meantime, we need to take a supply chain, which is largely based in Asia today, and find ways to bring that home closer to where we are. one thing COVID taught us is that our supply chains are fragile things, and we don't like to be dependent on something that gets stuck on an ocean liner on the other side of the world. And so this is a huge opportunity for us. I think a generational opportunity, particularly for Canada, but right across North America. Canada happens to have some of the minerals uniquely, like nickel and others, that are absolutely essential for batteries going forward. And so just as the vehicles will increase in number, the percentage of electric vehicles will grow over the next decade. We're going to have to fill in the gap of that supply chain. And just today, we announced, for example, that with a partner, we're creating a joint venture company to be located somewhere in North America to do processing of nickel materials to make cathode active materials for our batteries. And we've announced that we're going to build 4 major battery plants, and there will be plenty more of those afterwards. So it's an exciting time. It's one that we're going to need to do a lot of work with partners, and a big company like General Motors, we intend to lead and to make this absolutely delightful for our customers.
Thank you, David. You mentioned the gap that's coming. Some of the research right now says that there will be a 14 times increase in the demand of nickel, 9 to 10 times in lithium and copper. It is a massive gap that is to be met in the next 9 to 12 years. So I would turn right now to Paramita. I have a question for you about how Rio Tinto would achieve or meet that demand going forward. Before I ask that, though, we do have a 50% Indigenous audience, and there is one question I would like to raise to you about Rio Tinto's experience in Western Australia, particularly with Yukon Gorge. Can I ask you what you've learned from that situation as a company and how you have addressed that and how that will affect your operations going forward in other parts of the world?
Thanks, Mark. Let me address the second part of the question first, and then I'll go into the demand situation. Look, Yukon Gorge was a tragedy. Let me start with that. And let me first share some of my own personal reflections. The day the event happened, 11,000 miles away from Western Australia, sitting in Chicago, the tremors were felt. We were completely shocked. And I can tell you it was just, it was personal. It felt bad and shocking because it is against everything that we as Rio Tinto hold ourselves against as employees, as a corporation. Now, Rio Tinto's response to Yukon Gorge incident has been well documented, and the company's leadership has been very visible in their response, including our CEO, Group CEO, and the chairman of the board. But allow me to reiterate some of those points and relate what we have learned and how it applies to us in North America. Yukon Gorge was a tragedy, and it shouldn't have happened. We have apologized unreservedly about the destruction of those rock shelters. We fell short of our values as a company and breached the trust placed in us by the traditional owners. And we've made it our collective responsibility to ensure that it never happens to us again. Look, this learning has to be internal and external. We will learn from our relationships with our Indigenous owners and the traditional owners, not only in Australia, but in Canada and the US. And the learnings has to be taken from external internally. And internally, we also need to learn about what are the things that we need to change? How does this make Rio Tinto even better tomorrow? It's going to be a journey. It's not easy. But the main significant part, Mark, that I want to emphasize is the relationship and the trust that we need to gain back. We have our work cut out for us. The trust that we have lost, we need to gain back through lots of learnings from our employees, from the communities that host us, and from our customers and the communities, even beyond our mine site. We are hoping we come out as an even more positive and stronger Rio Tinto from this experience, and it is going to be a day in, day out learning, the path to which we are already on. With that, Mark, allow me to say that, I mentioned the diamond mines and, a large population of our employee base is from Indigenous population. We are now learning from all our communities, all our different sites, and making sure that the learning from one site goes all the way to the other. So the 11,000 miles difference shouldn't be felt, the tectonic shifts shouldn't be felt in the future. I'll shift gears to the next question mark that you asked about the demand growth, that most of the commodities have multipliers of 10 to 14x, as you mentioned, growth population. Look, these are supply chain risks that David mentioned. We don't have a choice. First and foremost, we have to meet this demand. If we do want the future to have electric vehicles, if we do want a green future and this energy transition to take place, the metals and the minerals have to be prepared to take care of it. Given the time that it usually takes to bring a greenfield product to production, we expect that the supply in the short to medium terms will come largely from brownfield expansions. For the battery materials and critical minerals, especially, perspective, we are actively working on the explorations and the strategy around it to identify very attractive growth opportunities. And I can say that the pathway looks very encouraging. Also exciting is the fact that we are focusing on maximizing values of our existing ore bodies and surrounding deposit. This includes mining our waste as well as valorizing our byproducts from existing processing activities. As an example, I mentioned tellurium and rhenium. These are coming from our current operations at our Kennecott copper mine. There is a risk to our supply chain, and especially in North America, because I think David touched upon it, that many of the minerals could be dependent on regions far, far away from us. And if anything COVID has taught us is that bring the supply chain closer, de-risks the supply chain much more. On that front, R&D will play a very critical role. We have to gear up, roll up our sleeves, and work on technologies that we haven't thought about thus far. Urban mining, looking at what we can extract from already existing products, and end-of-life recycling will play a very critical role. But in all of this, collaboration will be key, Mark, working together with our partners, with our customers and the market, and with the communities that host us. So back to you, Mark.
Great.
Hopefully I've addressed both the questions for you.
Thank you. I have a question now for Lena and Paul. You heard about partnerships with the market, with Indigenous parties. Your nation right now is one of the leaders in North America for involvement in the EV battery supply chain, particularly around rare earths, which is being produced out of your territory at the moment and being sold into the markets. Could I just ask you a question about how this partnership came to be? How is it that your community is part of this global supply chain?
Lena, you want to start us off?
I could start. So YKDFN, through our corporation, Det'on Cho, has been involved in the mining sector for 20 plus years. As a result, we have a fair amount of comfort with the extraction sector. We have built a significant set within our members for various mining roles along the capacity to execute in supply chain through Det'on Cho. We regularly meet with mining companies that are interested in resource plays that are on our traditional territory. Cheetah Resources is a smaller company that focused on rare earth extractions. They became interested in the Cheetah rare earth claims. Paul, did I miss anything?
Yeah, no, that's a great introduction. So, we do meet regularly, obviously, within our space. Northwest Territories, where we operate out of, has, as we call, good rocks, high mineralization potential, and the Cheetah project is just that. So it really started with a company called Avalon, Avalon being operating within that space for 25 plus years. Cheetah wanted to get in and develop a section of that for the rare earths. And as a result of that, was engaging with Yellowknives Dene First Nation, YKDFN, as the main impacted First Nation for that area. So through a series of meetings, understanding where the First Nation and subsequently the corporation, Det'on Cho, could play a meaningful part within that supply chain, they move forward, with the Cheetah project, which is basically a 3-year demonstration project. So twofold: one, to determine if those rare earths work well at a global scale, So a very simplistic way of looking at it, I'm not a geologist by any stretch of the imagination, not all rare earths are the same, and they need to be able to work with other rare earths around the world. We've determined that they do. The second part of that now is determining whether this project can be scaled into a full-time operation and from an economic feasibility standpoint. And that's sort of ongoing over the next couple of years. And that's where the First Nation and the corporation will play a meaningful part to understand, what part can we play within that, up to and including, things like equity positions, potentially governance structures, et cetera. Some really exciting stuff that can happen around that for sure. So it's very much an infancy project. We're the first year into it. We were sort of delayed by a year. COVID didn't help. So first year was quite successful. We've been able to extract those rare earths. This is the first rare earth project in Canada. And I just saw a study, I think last week, current numbers. Canada right now is about 0.7% of the rare earths in the country, assuming that is the Cheetah project. So we've got a huge amount of opportunity to expand rare earths. And we heard about things like, the need for copper and other key minerals. Canada and the North in particular is ripe to produce those minerals, to have a local supply chain. And then that Indigenous inclusion piece is absolutely critical. Thank you.
Thank you. David, a lot of the mining products that are coming now to market or will be coming to market, especially in Canada and the United States, will come from territories that have predominant Indigenous populations, especially in the more remote areas of the country. Is GM concerned about the origin of the raw materials that are going to your projects? And if so, how do you monitor that? Is it tracked by General Motors?
Yeah, we, through all our supply chain, whether it's mineral or otherwise, we, of course, are very concerned about ensuring that our supply chains are sustainable and properly monitored. This area of expansion into mineral sourcing and processing is particularly interesting. And in just this week, for example, General Motors announced that it's officially joined IRMA, which is the Initiative for Responsible Mining. And similarly here, as many you may know, for instance, the Mining Association of Canada has Towards Sustainable Mining, which is an incredible program. I have to admit, I have a passion for mining Paramita because my grandfather was the first executive director of the Mining Association of Canada. So I come from a mining family. And so one of, to me, the great advantages that Canada in particular has is a great track record of great companies like Rio Tinto and others that have worked with their communities, learned how to do that. We always need to do it better, and we need to have a good systems of accountability so that we can audit and check that these things are being done properly. In the battery world, for example, one of the most problematic minerals that we worry about is cobalt. And in fact, funny enough, one of the ways that we're reducing the cost of our batteries is to take a lot of cobalt out of our batteries. And we've reduced the need for cobalt by about 70% in our current General Motors Ultium battery formulation. But we still do need cobalt. It's a mineral that helps control heat, and heat, of course, it's important within a battery. So we need to make sure that we're sourcing from responsible places. Much of the cobalt in the world comes from the Congo, where there's real child labor and other issues that are extremely problematic. And so if we can not just shift our supply chain, but to make it accountable, make it something that we can monitor. But you can only do that if you have credible third-party groups that can help you to do it and to audit properly what is taking place. And so we hold ourselves accountable for that, but we need to hold our supply chain accountable for it as well. And that's not just environmental accountability, it's social and community participation and helping suppliers to work with us in that supply chain, et cetera. And so We're trying to do that on a global basis and on a local basis in the most responsible way. And as this enormous new part of our supply chain takes place, I'm pretty jazzed about being able to get back to my mining roots as part of what I get to do.
Thank you, David. You mentioned cobalt, which is a product that's used in electronics around the world, particularly in cell phones right now. And one of the companies involved in a very big user of cobalt is Apple. Apple Corporation has taken the action of going direct to mine sites in Africa to secure supply. Media reports had said that in some cases they were doing this to ensure that they could be assured of the quality of the social impacts and the environmental impacts in their products because their consumers were demanding that. It's interesting to see that GM is also concerned about where these materials come and how they've been produced. Paramita, could I ask you, from a Rio Tinto perspective, do you have that information to provide to a customer like Rio Tinto? Can you provide the information that they are asking for in terms of the supply chain, the origins, and the process used to produce those minerals?
The short answer to that question is yes, Mark. So let me first start with the OEMs wanting to have the assurance and the peace of mind that their supply chain is not only de-risked, but also sustainable and doing the right thing. And that's where Rio Tinto felt like, first and foremost, we owe it to the supply chain. We owe it to David and the rest of the OEMs to make sure that we give them that assurance. We are already offering that assurance to companies like Apple, like GM, like many other OEMs that are seeking this. So allow me to speak about START. We launched START earlier this year in February. START stands for Sustainability, Traceability, and Assurance from Rio Tinto. What does that mean? We want to bring radical transparency to the supply chain. David shouldn't have to ask questions. And by the way, David, thank you for mentioning your linkage back to the mining sector. It put a smile on my face. But David shouldn't have to ask us about where are you getting it from and how you're producing it. We should be forwarding that information to him. So START essentially is the nutrition label of our materials on a blockchain technology. Just pure curiosity, the first thing that comes to the audience's mind when we say nutrition label. When we say nutrition label, the first thing that comes to our employees' mind is turning the label of our food products and seeing how many carbs, how much magnesium, how much potassium, how many calories are we intaking it. That's essentially what START is. When we send our materials over to our customers, the label actually shows exactly what the ESG credentials for it is, including the provenance. So where did it originate from bauxite to where was it refined for alumina to where it was smelted for aluminium, and how was it produced? How much of that? How many metrics can we provide in terms of assuring David and the OEMs that this was not only rightly and responsibly produced, but it was ethically produced with no child labor? And what are the ESG credentials that can go with it? Look, START has had an overwhelming response from the supply chain. In the first 3 months itself, around 100 customers jumped on it for aluminium. One should ask, why blockchain? And blockchain is because this is the cutting edge technology that pretty much takes the chain of custody, penetrates right through the supply chain, and has the assurance and credibility of whether the data is sitting with us as a Rio Tinto employee. David should be able to see it. START has 10 criteria. They include things like business integrity, third-party assurance, regulatory compliance. And why is that important? Because the auto sector is also going into an era of USMCA and rules of origin, and in the future, potentially CBAM. And what blockchain does for us is, in a very time-effective manner, real time, the OEMs should be able to see not only where the materials came from, how it was produced, whether it was third-party certified, whether it's, for us, ASI for aluminium is the benchmark that we use. It's ICMM and many other third-party certifications that we go for. But making sure that the data is there at the hands of the OEMs and the supply chain for their use for when they need it. Look, we are very proud of the work that we have done with START, but the work with START will only be successful when it's useful for the OEMs, for David and General Motors, for when they want to say, you know what, we know exactly where our materials came from, what credentials it holds, and the fact that it gives them that peace of mind. So I'm going to stop there, and hopefully we can address more questions regarding START later on. Back to you, Mark.
Great, thank you. Lena and Paul, you heard at the beginning of the session that the coming market for EV battery minerals is going to be about $1 trillion. You also heard from David how they're ramping up as an industry to meet the demand. You also heard about things like charging stations and the other infrastructure that has to come along. It's not just about extracting minerals. There's an entire ecosystem that comes with electrification. So the question for you is, for both of you, is that you are one of the leaders right now in Indigenous involvement in the supply chain. Has your nation given thought to participating in other areas beyond mining, perhaps in manufacturing or value-added services that could be provided to that market?
Lena, do you want me to grab this one?
I was going to say Paul can take that one.
Sure, great. So absolutely, Mark. Det'on Cho, YKDFN, we're very much a business case-driven organization and culture. So where there's an opportunity, where it makes sense, we're absolutely happy to look at taking advantage of that. We've got interests outside of the mining space, and we continue to develop a lot of various business opportunities. When you start looking at things like manufacturing, et cetera, I personally have a background in manufacturing, led an Indigenous manufacturing company in Yukon. That can be a bit challenging here in Northwest Territories, from a costing standpoint, power, labor, access to labor, et cetera. So I think that's one that's a bit challenging. It doesn't mean that we couldn't be looking at investing in those opportunities, and we have outside the territory where you can make those business cases a little bit more meaningful. If you look at other Indigenous groups that operate, whether it be a Nunavut, David had mentioned Tuk up in that region, they've got investments across the country. If we look at the Alaskan corporations, those are groups that I personally look at heavily. They're invested across the lower 48. So I think if there's one thing that you're definitely going to see from Det'on Cho, from other Indigenous groups, is investments that they have a meaningful part of, but maybe outside their traditional territories or their regions. I want to touch a little bit around the concept of environment, social governance, ESG that was mentioned, and blockchain technology. I think that really is something that's going to be a very meaningful part and definitely plays a meaningful part within the Indigenous space that we're part of. You can't talk about ESG, particularly in the resource sector in Canada, without that Indigenous inclusion. And that's what personally gets me jazzed. When we look at a evolving resource sector for these key minerals that are in demand, we're going to see much more emphasis placed around the Indigenous part of that supply chain and that meaningful inclusion. And I think it's a really exciting time for Indigenous business, where we're going to see more Indigenous groups that are becoming part of the greater economy. We talk about Indigenomics and the $1 trillion emerging Indigenous space. That's going to continue to develop, morph, and grow. And I think the next decade within that is going to be really exciting, not just for Det'on Cho, but for Indigenous right across the country.
Great, thank you. Just to point to the audience, slido.com is where we're taking questions from the audience you'd like us to pose. And the address there is #FNMPC. So I'm turning back to David here. You heard about Paul and Lena talking about meaningful partnerships with Indigenous people. And I would like to direct a question to you and GM. What is GM's position towards buying from, supplying or securing supplies from minority businesses or Indigenous-owned companies across Canada and the United States?
Well, I thank you for the question, because one of the things that sort of makes it really fun to go to work at General Motors is the values of the company and the culture of the company, and diversity is absolutely critical to that. And we've literally challenged ourselves to try and become the most diverse company in the world. But in the manufacturing sector and the engineering sector, it's not always been a leader in that particular area. We just have reopened our Oshawa assembly plant this week this month, I guess. And very exciting, be hiring people and doing that. We're very proud, for example, that that plant now is 50% women working in the assembly plant, which is not what you typically think of in an auto assembly plant. But diversity is, of course, much more than that. We have, and I'll give a shameless commercial here, a website, which is www.gmsupplierdiversity.com. And that is a place that any of our partner groups can go to also look at what's it take to become a customer or a supplier to General Motors. Because we do have an enormous supply chain, and we do have to make sure that we support those types of relationships. I think it's something, as we now develop this new supply chain and we partner more with our natural resource industries that have been on the forefront of those types of relationships, especially with Indigenous groups. This is an area that we've got to learn a lot more. But I want to sort of relay a little story, if I can, which just for me is important as part of the culture of my company. We all think of, those of us in Canada, think about the auto sector as being clustered around the Oshawa and Windsor area. And it has been really since the 1960s, and it's a huge part of the Ontario economy. It wasn't always that way. In fact, a lot of people have forgotten that General Motors had a auto plant in Saskatchewan, in Regina, opened in 1928. And one of the stories that's important to us, and we often remember, that when that plant was opened and they were selling trucks, they were making trucks and Chevrolets and Buicks for the Canadian population in the West, and it was more of a Canada-made, not an integrated North American industry quite at that point. Our president was a character named Colonel Sam McLaughlin, and he went to open up that plant and invited Chief Red Dog to be there for the plant opening. And the two of them became very good friends for a lifetime. And in fact, he received his name of Kichikaso Kin Esco. I hope I got that right. It means strong arm. And he was awarded with a ceremonial headdress, which is still today in the First Nations University of Canada at the University of Regina. And to us, that's an important sort of just symbol of a continuity that we have to maintain and look for. Now, that plant in Regina was taken over by the Canadian government to be part of the munitions industry in the Second World War. So we're not there anymore, but we do need to be part of the community. And so I encourage people who are interested and have something that they can provide to us or to our great suppliers, companies like Rio Tinto. We hope that we can build those relationships. It starts, though, I think, with a little bit of cultural affinity. And for us, that old story helps.
Thank you. I'm going to turn back to Lena and Paul. There's a question from our audience. Is there space for the Government of Canada to support successful partnerships between Indigenous groups and proponents in this area? If so, what key policy actions should Canada undertake?
Lena, you want to start us out on that one? We're pretty passionate about that.
Yeah. I think that there's a great space for Canada to be involved. There's a lot of policy that's put into place for industry to build their businesses, and not a lot of space for the Indigenous organizations to play a real part in it. And where the governments could participate, in my opinion, is they ensure that the First Nations are involved right at the beginning of all projects. And that means updating all of their policy and procedures to also include in their procurement Indigenous involvement. Paul, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. No, that's great. So I think Canada absolutely plays a role in this. We've seen the commitment mandate of 5% for Indigenous procurement for Canadian spend, federal spend. I think that's a good start. But we have to ensure that Indigenous groups also have the capacity to participate. So we can't just have procurement side. There has to be a real emphasis around training, development, capacity building to assist communities in actively participating. Lena's spot on. Starting at the front end, that meaningful consultation, real meaningful engagement. But we're doing ourselves a disservice as Canada, as a country, if we're not ensuring that capacity across the board is where it needs to be for Indigenous groups. And so that age-old saying that a rising tide lifts all boats. It's in the best interest of all Canadians that we ensure that we've got Indigenous communities, Indigenous businesses, corporations, et cetera, that have the necessary tools to have that meaningful participation, to bring back value, and at that micro sort of level, that circular economy within their communities where they're recognizing value and they're able to develop and continue on that path forward.
Great, thank you. I'm going to, one question, and this may be our last question because we're running short on time. It's a fascinating discussion. I wish we had more time. And actually we do on April 25th and 26th. So come back. At that point, we'll have a much longer discussion around this topic, especially around minerals and the role towards a net zero future. Paramita, one question for you. Does Rio Tinto have a program or resources similar to what GM mentioned on what it takes to be a supplier to your company?
Absolutely, yes. Mark, absolutely, yes. First and foremost, GM is a customer. So thank you, Dave. Thank you, David, for all your business. But we absolutely do. The thing is that, the word partnership and collaboration has come out again and again. And let's just spend a little time around that. Why is that important? Because for the longest time, we have kind of looked at manufacturing, assembly, manufacturing, end products, resource sector, and then everything in the communities. No longer is that case. We are actively working on with a 360 degrees view. Our procurement policies are changing. We are looking at how we actually bring more of a local procurement, local meaningful participation from the community. And I love the phrase that Paul used, meaningful inclusion. That doesn't mean just meaningful inclusion in terms of hiring and development, but also meaningful inclusion in our overall buying and selling perspective. Meaningful inclusion, and definitely in terms of participation from Indigenous communities, and you will see on our website exactly what we are talking about from the work and the resources that we are putting in to bring First Nation employees, and how do we develop them to leadership positions so that we learn from them. Now, towards GM side, on the customer market side, we are actively looking at not only doing but showing. I call it the trust but verify environment. GM needs to look at us and say, are you all doing all the things that you hold as values? And that's where START comes in. This is my time to shamelessly advertise one website to the audience and to my panelists. If you have a little bit of time, do visit www.startresponsible.com. That will show you why radical transparency is now the name of the game for us in Rio Tinto, which means that every metric that GM wants or our communities hold dear to, we will listen to it and bring towards for our minerals and metals. Our communities should hold the peace of mind, and GM should hold the peace of mind that all of us are working together towards that common goal. And the common goal is, yes, there is a lot of money to be had with EV revolution, energy transition, but for this green future, we all have to work together. And I say it in one simple term: sustainability is a team sport, and we all have a role to play. And Rio Tinto hopes that we can be part of that solution that a GM and all our other customers want from us. Mark, back to you.
Great, thank you. We could talk for another hour on this topic, and I appreciate all the time and energy you've put into this presentation. As we're looking to wrap up today's discussion, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today, speakers and audience, for tuning in from across North America. Please don't forget to follow FNMPC on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter to receive news and announcements on the next episode of this series, and for more information on the Toward Net Zero by 2050 conference next April. A big thank you to our sustaining partners, Collier Project Leaders, Cowie, Gowlings WLG, and New Gold for supporting today's discussion. Until next time, have a wonderful and safe holiday.